So my presentation today will look at the objectives is to examine the role of gender in mangrove conservation and resource use. Secondly, to explore the impacts of climate change on mangrove ecosystems in the Solomons and highlight the importance of indigenous ecological knowledge in sustainable mangrove management. And so, just background information on mangrove and the Solomons. The Solomon Island is a Pacific island nation located in Melanesia, which consists of nearly 1,000 islands. It is known for its rich biodiversity, coastal ecosystems, and most of the people highly depend on the marine resources for their livelihoods. In the Solomon Islands, mangroves are normally found in sheltered bays and along river mouths. And a study in 2011 showed that in the Solomon Island, where 65,000 hectares of mangrove are present, and which shows that it is the second largest stands of mangrove in the Pacific, with PNG as the highest, and followed by Fiji and New-Caledonia. So in the Solomon Island, a study which was in 2001 showed that there were 26 species of mangrove types, but today it has gone from 30 to even 40 species of mangroves. Okay, so why mangrove? Mangrove forests are very critical for food security and livelihoods for coastal communities in the Solomon Islands. Mangroves are a source of food, especially fish, shells, crabs, and building materials, and that's why they're very important. So for this research, we have questions, 3 central questions, which we would like to answer. The first one is, what is the significance of mangrove forest for community members in Marovo Lagoon, which is a study site, Western Solomon Islands? And 2, what are the gendered values and practices of mangrove? And 3, how is mangrove change, degradation, and conservation experienced differently for women, men, and youths? And for our method, it is basically qualitative. We interviewed 51 men, women, and youths in 5 villages around Sege, which is Marovo Lagoon, between 2022 2024. So it was collected by myself and my colleague, other researcher from University of Graz, and so our study site was in Marovo, Western Solomon Islands. So they were categorized according to youths, men, and women. And so basically the finding shows that mangroves are ecologically important in the case that they protect coastlines, but also people living along the coast in Marovo Lagoon. And there were reports showing that there were new areas of land progression that have happened because of mangrove that are present. They're normally at river mouths. And so that's why mangroves are very important. Not only that, but it is also culturally, it is very important because in those areas, it shows that according to interviews, it is a place or space where men normally go there to teach how to fish at an early age. So that space is more like a intergenerational transfer of knowledge, and it is very important culturally. Not only that, but mangrove are very important medicinal plants, according to interviews. Not only, it was more reported by men, and so that was more like, we thought it will be more women, but men were more reported to have medicinal purposes for mangrove. Not only that, but they have custom stories or belief around some of the sacred animals that are in the mangrove. For example, crocodiles. In Marovo Lagoon, crocodiles cannot, attack you unless they sense that you are doing something that is that is not good, or maybe fear of something, or you have land disputes. And so sometimes these are sacred animals, within mangroves itself. And in crabs also, there were custom stories more told by men. I think because they normally go to the mangrove at an early age, so the knowledge is passed on from them by their grandfathers or fathers. The crabs are, they said that they kill giants, and crabs are very important because there was a lady who I interviewed, and she said, mangrove, when I'm married to a person from Marovo and I come to stay, you have to see a crab, and that signifies that you are welcome in that area. If you do not see a crab, it means that some stories, but it's basically around beliefs and culture and around mangrove. So it's, yeah. So gender differences in mangrove use. So according to the interview, women and men tend to use mangrove, but different species. Women tend to harvest and pick shells and mangrove bean from what we call the Bruguiera gymnorrhiza and Lumnicera litoria. And so they harvest more, and so they use different mangrove species. Compared to men, they use mangrove for wood, firewood, and even copra before. They use it to burn, and then, firewood. And so they usually depend more on different types of mangrove. They are Cereops tagal, yes. So this species preference, they reflect also the gendered cultural roles and diverse interactions with mangrove ecosystems. And likewise, men usually use mangrove at an early stage to learn how to understand the fish cycle and also signs of fish spawning. So next, looking at climate change, there has, as we all know, mangrove is not only important for coastal communities, but it is also under threat. And climate change is one of the impacts which affect mangrove, but more human activities like logging, using for firewood. But this, we will more focus on climate change. So most of the participants indicate that mangrove have been observed more impacted by climate change and sea level rise in the past years. So in the past years, it means like just 3 to 5 years. They just observed that sea level has rise, compared to maybe 10 years ago. So the sea level rise is just evident according to most of the participants. So changes of mangrove were described as diebacks. As we all know, sea level rise, there were evidence of diebacks in which when sea level rise and in saltwater intrusion, it also caused stress in mangroves and causing diebacks. And also increased storm frequency was also discussed. Storm and lightnings, those were also said that they affected mangrove. When there's lightning and thunder, it also impacts mangrove as well, based on the interviews. So this is a picture of what mangrove diebacks look like, based on the sea level rise in Marovo Lagoon. So you can see actually the roots here. It shows that most of the mangrove are due to sea level rise, and so they're stressed. Okay, so how does it affect women, youths, and men? But these impacts affect women more disproportionately, right? Increased burdens for resource gathering. Women experience burden of harvesting with sea level rise and also tend to paddle further to harvest. When there's sea level rise, women, especially, and youths tend to paddle or further venture out to catch fish. And because of sea level rise. Women reported that before we know where to harvest, but today the changes in climate, they determine when we go to harvest. So it's more like it changes over time. Also, it threats to food security, tides and sea level rise also alter mangrove habitat for shellfish and crabs and other food that women harvest. And most of these are declining in numbers and difficult to find. As we can see here, a lady who is trying to find or get crabs and shellfish, but due to high tide. It normally prolonged over months, and so it is difficult for them to harvest. And when women are seen as responsible to feed the family, this also affects them more. So when we talk about the impacts of climate change, we tend to forget the positive impacts, which we want to look at as opportunities. So based on the interviews over the 5 years, women have reported a positive impact of climate change, especially sea level rise. Like before, women said that the areas that do not have mangrove are being observed. But today, with more increase of sea level rise, it enables mangrove fruit or propagules to travel and even reach areas that have never have mangrove. So that's an important part of sea level rise. It helps to enable mangrove seedlings to float and attach and even grow naturally in various locations. And so we can see that there are also areas that have more mangroves that are intact. Okay, so replanting and conservation based on gender dimensions. So based on the interviews, more women and youths, they respond positively to more mangrove initiatives compared to men. When we ask them, do you think it will work or do you think that mangrove restoration is important? And mostly women and youths, they have higher response, compared to men. One interview, there's no response from men. It's a zero response on replanting of mangrove in areas that have been logged over. So yes, it shows that women and youths are very active and forefront in terms of conservation. Replanting mangroves over logged over areas over 10-year period. This was reported especially by youths. They mentioned that mangrove should be replanted over logged area for over 10 years of time. Yeah? And also there were more women and youths who support and propose the idea of protecting and managing mangroves. And so we can also see here women who are very actively engaged in mangrove replanting, and we can also see that they also suggested protecting and sustainably using of mangroves could be effective when there are existing laws on managing mangrove ecosystem, like for example, certain mangrove zones for conservation. So the next question should be, but should it only be women's role, or should it take on board both men, women, and youths? And so here it looks at indigenous mangrove knowledge, and also based on the interview, men expressed more knowledge on medicinal uses compared to women and youths. This is quite different from in Fiji, where women know more about medicinal plants of mangrove, but in the Solomon, men reported more use of medicinal plants of mangrove compared to women. Men also talk more about custom stories or the stories that are related to mangrove. But this can be basically due to the interaction with mangrove during childhood days. While women indicated that mangrove replanting was taught to them by their fathers way back, it shows and indicates this has been practiced years back, and which is still important for adaptation today. Therefore, it is important to involve men and youth in the conversation as well. And finally, importance of integrating indigenous knowledge and gender into climate action. Indigenous knowledge, according to our study, varies based on community and also within communities. For instance, related custom stories, mangrove conservation and practices. While women often are excluded from decision-making spaces on community and national level, they may experience disproportionate burden of climate impacts like we have seen. Yeah? So furthermore, women often seen as responsible for carrying out the extra conservation and replanting work, and therefore the process of integrating knowledge, indigenous and gender into climate action is very critical on a community, national and regional level. And that summarizes my presentation. And yes, I welcome any questions for myself. And this is my other colleague, Heidi, from University of Graz. which can make it today. Thank you, Thomas. Questions?
Thank you, Thomas, Maritao, and thank you for your presentation about mangroves and the gender gap in the vision of representing mangrove. It's true that this is also a big problematic in New Caledonia, the problematic of replanting mangroves on climate change. If you have any question?
No questions.
Me, I have a question. You talk about the decrease of the number of mangroves, and some you say that some women say that in some area mangroves are growing because of the sea level. Do you know if there is any data on this the population of mangroves to have an estimation? I'm thinking, for example, of the use of satellite pictures to follow the evolution of the population of mangroves. So I don't know if there is any work or any data on this.
Thank you so much, Jonas. So is it more like monitor which type of mangrove species and those areas, right? But normally those areas are located along the river mouths, and especially by obstacle, when this type of species, when they're more, they usually trap more sediments. But I think that calls for future studies as well to look at over time, you know, like certain places that have prograde or over time and how effective, because there are areas that have prograde over time, and then we see a lot of species, especially crocodiles, sunbathing, and then a lot of birds coming in. You know, we also think of sea level rise as sedimentation, coastal erosion, but there are areas with mangrove that can trap sediments over time. And I think that's a good thing. In our next research, we could do more on observation over time. Mapping.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Another question?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I just have a question about your methodology. How did you choose people you interview how do you choose, in terms of representativeness of your pool?
So basically, we looked at those people we target women and men and youths based on their interaction with the mangrove over time and their knowledge around the area. So men would be more like fishers, people who go to fish more, and those who interact with mangrove. But basically, those women are more those who are more on a daily basis. They visit mangrove in those villages, and yes, but also putting into place that categorizing them according to men, women, and youths. But it is more on the interaction with the mangrove, not those without knowledge, but zoning to those people who have more knowledge around mangroves. Yes.
Just a question on the fact that it can be quite surprising that a woman are specialized in replantation of mangrove, and men doesn't say that they are doing replantation.
Yeah.
But women explain that they have learned how to replant by their father. Is it,
yes.
Or maybe I didn't
yes, their
get it?
And their grandfather and mothers. Yes.
Grandmother too.
And yes.
So yeah. So maybe did you look for a generation gap or a shift in gender roles around mangrove replantation, or maybe?
Thank you for that question. That's an important question. But based on our study, we also look at that before, according to literature, it is women's heavily, they harvest mangrove, and they get their information from knowledge from their father and grandfather. But today, there's also changes in which not only women harvest mangrove, but there are also youths and men are also taking on this role. So there's also a shift. Like normally we said mangrove supposed to be men, or I don't know. Now it's women grove or something. It's a space where like everyone has to be So I think, but like you said, I think there could be studies on that, but we are basically more focused on the current just over 5 years of yeah.
Yeah, that maybe there is no need to give an answer, but I think there is something quite surprising. So
yes.
maybe to look
yes.
at
Yeah,
deeper into to deep this question of generational gap and gender roles and concerning
yes.
mangrove.
Mm-hmm.
I have understood that this is the beginning of a research project. Not you're not at the
yes.
totally at the end. So
no, it's So thanks for that.
It is okay to not be able to answer every question.
Mm-hmm. But yes, based on youths as well, I think this knowledge is also dying out because of the elders, and this need to be revived or documented, and on mangroves.